All right, so next up on our list is our sunflower. And again, I feel like you guys are gonna be absolute pros at this satin stitch flower by the time you're done this kit. So we're doing their 3 strands again, and the same as always, we're gonna split the center of our petal. And for this specific flower, I recommend doing what I would call like the foreground flowers. So this one, you can see the ones that you see the full petal, whereas like these ones are meant to be back behind. I'm going to do all of those ones first, and then I'm going to fill in the background ones. It may just be in my own head, but I feel like when I do that, I get a better shape that kind of makes me feel like it's more visible which ones are meant to be behind and which ones are meant to be forward. So we're going to do, I'm going to do one of these little petals for you guys, and then I'll come back and fill in another one of these and then show you the filling in the one behind. So, okay, so this one has a pretty wide base, which was why we were staggering our stitches so much on the other ones and doing so many short to long stitches. So because this one actually has almost as wide of a base as it does at the top, you don't need to really put any short stitches if you don't want to. So this would be more of like a standard satin stitch than it would be like the satin stitch flower concept and when I say satin stitch flower, it doesn't necessarily have to be a flower that you're applying that to. I use flower because I work in 90% florals, but it's pretty much a satin stitch in any shape that isn't like the same on one side as it is. So you're filling like a asymmetrical shape. That's the word I was looking for, asymmetrical. So anytime you're filling an asymmetrical shape, you use kind of that staggered stitches technique. I work in like 99% florals, so I called it my satin stitch flower, but it's not necessarily a specific stitch. So this one was pretty straightforward, this petal specifically, because it was very much even from the top to the bottom. So you can go around and do your front petals, which all will pretty much have the same idea. They might be a little bit, some of them might be a little smaller at the center than other ones, like less symmetrical, right? So you might have to do a few short stitches if you feel it's needed, but I don't think you'll have to do as many, and if you don't do any, that's fine too. I'm just really wanting to shape out the sides of this one. These ones, just because that is how you're gonna help define this front petal to our back petals. So once you've got all of your front petals, so it's pretty much every other petal actually, to be exact. So every other petal, and then they're all pretty close in shape. So I'll only do one, and then we'll come back once I've got my second front petal done, and I'll show you a back petal. Okay, so I've defined my 2 and finished my 2 front ones, and then we're gonna work on the back. And I wanna make sure that it doesn't overlap the front ones, and hopefully you'll still be able to kind of tell that it's a little bit in the background. So what I did for this one is I did a lot of shorter stitches. So just going in and then kind of tipping it in behind the back of that. The only thing that I'll say is I wanted my tip to be a little stronger than that. So I'm gonna go and I'm gonna do one more stitch over top. Just wanna create like where you can see that it's a point. Okay, so we're tucking in behind and more on an angle for these ones than I was doing for the front ones. Probably the most difficult part of this little one is making sure that we get on the outside of that line. I'm even having a little bit of trouble just from the angle I'm at. So I'm putting in more stitches than I would have planned, but I'm trying to make sure that I'm covering that black line. So staying on the outside of that line. And then again, still just scooping it in, tucking it in behind, and they're kind of on a little bit more of an angle than your front ones, which is fine because it helps to keep that shape of looking like it's behind. So I did do more of an angled shape in the back, and then the front were straighter, which helped show that the ones that were more angled were actually behind. And then I'm just going to do a tiny stitch to cover that little spot there. And then, like I've said before, less is more. You want to keep, you want to do less than more and then add if you need. So I think you can see what I mean though by the fact that like these ones are straight, so you can see those are the front petals. And then because these ones really angle in along the sides, it helps define which ones are my back petals and which ones are my front petals. We've talked about the satin stitch before. This one is a little bit bigger than any of the satin stitches that we've done. We did our satin stitch up on our white flower. So for this one, I really want to focus on how we can keep our satin stitch straight. So I'm going to start with my first line, and I'm obviously like making a straight line through the center. You can use a ruler if you want to draw some lines. That's totally up to you. Everything will be covered, so you could use a pen if you have one you want to use. Then what I'm going to do after that is I'm going to section off my sunflower. So I'm going to look at it and I'm going to say, okay, this is even to create my next line. Because what will happen if you just do lines side by side is you may end up on like this angle by the time you get to the end of it. And this isn't a massive space, but it is a space big enough that you could really end up on a very different angle than was originally planned. And even now I'm like, is that perfect? It can be difficult. I think that there's like a margin for error. You don't have to like stress yourself out and get out a level to make sure that you're putting it in the exact right spot. But it's nice to define sort of where that one was maybe a little too close to the other one, but that's okay. You're gonna have to put in all of your filler stitches anyways, so if they're too close, that's fine. So we're just going across from one side to the other, kind of just making our outline. And obviously I don't have stitches on both sides, so it's a little harder to show exactly, but you're going to go in or come up pretty much right at the edge of exactly where your stitches come into the center. So, and then you're just filling in those spaces. So for this one, it looks like I'm going to need 2 stitches between this section, and it's much easier. And you can run your needle when they start to get close together, run your needle between the space so that you can make sure you're coming in at the right spot. And then you just basically split each section again. So that one was like 2 stitches for the other one, but this one, like I just threw 1 stitch in the center and it actually filled the whole thing. Whereas I probably, had I stitched directly beside the other one, I probably would have ended up putting 2 stitches in. So it does even save you a little bit of thread because you realize that you sometimes need less stitches than you would have thought. So it makes it easier and you use less thread. Okay, and they sit so much flatter, I find, when you've done it this way because they fill in the gaps perfectly instead of almost like being too full. And then on the edges, which is the same thing, you're just going up and down, I just follow the curve. And then for my very, very tiniest ones on the outside, like if I feel like I just need to shape out that circle a little bit more, I kind of use our technique that we've used. I come up and I go in a little bit like right beside it so that it just kind of curves it out a bit. I don't necessarily make like a very bold end line. I'll almost tuck the ends under a little bit just to help curve it out. I don't know if that's like a technical tip, but it works for me. So when you're coming up, just being careful as you're coming through, because even there I started to kind of come up and I was pulling on one of the threads from my sunflower. So just to be careful that you're not going through the threads that are already there. You want to go next to them. You might snag something. All right, so that should give you enough of a tutorial on how to do your satin stitch. I'm now kind of doing them side by side, but I could have split that. You can either do them side by side, or you can just keep splitting the section until it's full. It's kind of up to you. But I do notice that I've kind of, even by not splitting the section, I kind of moved my angle. I guess it just depends on how good you are at keeping the angle correct. I tend to not have the best perception of level, so I think I'm doing a straight line and then it ends up being totally diagonal. So okay, so we are all finished our satin stitch and it's beautiful. So we're all done on this sunflower and we can move on to our tulip.